The gavel struck once, sharp and final, echoing through the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, the only sound in the Los Angeles County Courthouse was the hollow reverberation of wood against wood, but then came the whispers, soft at first, like the wind stirring leaves, then rising into a low, restless murmur. Everyone had come expecting a routine trial, another open-and-shut case in a city that processed hundreds of them every week. They had not come expecting a story they would never forget. At the center of it all stood Malik Johnson, a 19-year-old boy with wrists bound in iron cuffs that glinted beneath the fluorescent lights. The chains rattled faintly when he shifted, though his stance remained steady, shoulders squared in a way that made the restraints seem out of place. His face bore no smirk, no bravado, only a quiet determination that unsettled those who noticed. He was young, undeniably so, but his eyes carried an oldness, the weight of someone who had studied the world and decided he would not let it define him. Judge Robert Holloway leaned back in his chair, tilting his head as though to better examine the boy before him. His voice, when it came, was calm and laced with dry amusement. Another teenager who thinks he's smarter than the law. Son, this isn't a debate club. Don't go thinking you can talk your way out of this. He tapped the handle of the gavel lightly against the bench, not to command order, but as if bored, almost playful. Then, with a faint smirk curling one side of his mouth, he added, "Let's make this quick. I've got a tea time at 2. The remark drew laughter, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. The bailiff chuckled. The stenographer's lips twitched with hidden amusement. The prosecutor let out a quiet laugh, too polished to be genuine. It was the kind of laughter that served no purpose but to remind the boy of where he stood, to assure him that in this room, he was not the one in control. Malik did not lower his gaze. He let the laughter roll over him like distant thunder, neither flinching nor responding. To some, his stillness might have looked like arrogance, to others, perhaps resignation. But beneath the surface, his mind worked with careful precision, turning each word, each gesture, into pieces of a puzzle he had long prepared himself to solve. He had grown up around courtrooms, not as a defendant but as a shadow. His mother, Angela Johnson, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years. Every evening she would come home with stories, not the polished, sanitized accounts that made their way into newspapers, but the unspoken truths. How prosecutors cut corners to secure convictions, how judges favored certain attorneys, how public defenders were often stretched so thin they could barely offer their clients a chance. Malik had listened. At first, it was just background noise, the tired voice of a mother sharing her day. But slowly, steadily, those stories became lessons. He began asking questions, reading through the case files she sometimes left on the table, following legal arguments like others followed sports highlights. By 14, he could dissect a trial better than most college students. By 16, he had begun to dream, not of escaping the system, but of mastering it. Now, standing accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest, he understood the irony. He had never planned to be on this side of the courtroom, yet here he was, in the role of the defendant. The prosecutor, Daniel Wright, rose from his seat with the casual authority of a man who believed victory was already his. His suit was immaculate, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. He carried a stack of papers, though his stride suggested he hardly needed them. His voice, when he spoke, was confident, practiced, like an actor delivering a line he had rehearsed 100 times. "Your Honor, members of the court," Wright began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Malik Johnson, was apprehended in direct connection with a stolen Lexus sedan, reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued the vehicle through downtown Los Angeles, during which the defendant attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were recovered from the driver's side door, and the evidence, as we will show, speaks for itself." His words landed with deliberate weight. The gallery shifted, people whispering among themselves, nodding at the apparent simplicity of the case. A stolen car, a chase, fingerprints, what more needed to be said? It all seemed damning, clear-cut, the kind of evidence that built convictions and padded resumes. Judge Holloway gave a slow nod, the corner of his mouth still twisted into that faint smirk. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." Go on. The prosecutor adjusted his cufflinks and stepped toward the jury box, his shoes clicking crisply against the polished floor. He gestured toward Malik with a rehearsed confidence. The defense may attempt to convince you this was all a misunderstanding, that Malik Johnson is a victim of circumstance. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police? What kind of victim leaves his fingerprints on the car he supposedly never touched? The state will provide testimony from the officers involved, including Officer Henry, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel. The facts are clear. The evidence is undeniable. The tension in the room tightened, pulling the air taut. For most of those present, the narrative felt complete. A boy, a stolen car, fingerprints, a chase, what more was there? Malik stood motionless, listening to every word, not with fear but with focus. He knew better than anyone how stories could be twisted into truths, how assumptions could masquerade as evidence. He thought of the evenings he had spent at the kitchen table, his mother explaining how a single unchecked report could sway an entire trial. He thought of the names she mentioned, people lost in the machinery of the system because no one had bothered to look deeper. He thought of the nights he spent reading about cases overturned years later, lives wasted in the gap between error and correction. And as he thought, he smiled, not visibly, not enough for anyone to notice, but inside, where the first flicker of resolve began to glow. When his court-appointed attorney rose, a weary woman named Karen, who had barely spoken since entering the courtroom, her hands trembled slightly. "Your Honor, my client," she began, but Malik touched her arm gently, a silent signal. She froze, looked at him with uncertainty, then slowly sat back down. The room hushed, curious. Malik took a step forward. His chains clinked softly. He lifted his chin, his voice clear. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The words sliced through the courtroom like a blade through cloth, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The gallery stirred, the whispers swelling into disbelief. The prosecutor's lips twisted into a grin, his laughter bubbling up. "This should be entertaining," he muttered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Judge Holloway leaned forward, peering down at Malik over the rim of his glasses. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself," Malik repeated, his tone steady, calm, the way one might state a fact rather than a request. The judge studied him, his expression shifting subtly from amusement to curiosity. The courtroom waited, breath held, for what would come next. The silence that followed Malik's declaration seemed to stretch endlessly, wrapping itself around the chamber until even the scrape of a chair would have sounded deafening. The boy's words hung in the air, defiant and steady, challenging not only the prosecution but the entire architecture of the room that had been built to contain him. "I'll be defending myself," he repeated, and though his voice was calm, it carried an unmistakable edge of conviction. Judge Holloway leaned back, folding his hands before his chin, the smirk lingering but tempered now by something else. Amusement, perhaps, but laced with a faint trace of curiosity. "You're certain about this, Mr. Johnson? This court will hold you to it. No theatrics, no excuses." "Yes, Your Honor," Malik said. "I am certain." The judge exhaled slowly, as though conceding to the spectacle. "Very well. Proceed. But understand this, young man, this is not a playground for your imagination. If you waste the court's time, I'll shut this down myself." The prosecutor's grin widened, his confidence swelling. "Your Honor, if the defendant insists on embarrassing himself, I won't stand in the way. The state is prepared to continue." But the room had shifted, ever so slightly. The laughter that had once punctuated the air was gone. The spectators leaned forward, drawn by a curiosity they couldn't quite explain. A boy in chains was about to challenge the very system designed to convict him. Malik took a measured step forward, his cuffs rattling faintly. He turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Wright, a moment ago you mentioned Officer Henry's testimony, that he personally witnessed me behind the wheel of the stolen Lexus. Is that correct?" Wright smirked, arms crossed. "That's right. It's in his report." "And you're confident in that testimony?" Malik asked. Of course, Wright said, his voice tinged with boredom. It's a sworn statement from a trained officer of the law. Malik nodded, as though considering the words carefully. Then he turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move to dismiss Officer Henry's testimony as evidence. The gallery gasped softly. The judge raised his eyebrows, intrigued despite himself. Wright shuffled his papers, his polished composure slipping ever so slightly. And while we're on the subject, Malik continued, was the forensic specialist who processed that evidence subpoenaed to testify in this court? He turned sharply to face the judge. Judge Holloway blinked, caught off guard. Prosecutor Wright? The hesitation was unmistakable. No, Your Honor, Wright admitted reluctantly. Malik gave a small nod, his lips pressed into a line. So the state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it necessary to bring the specialist who handled it. No opportunity for me to cross-examine, to ask about chain of custody, to question accuracy. Convenient, isn't it? The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, more pointed. The jury shifted again, this time not with dismissal but with dawning skepticism. Wright's jaw tightened. Your Honor, the state maintains. But Malik wasn't finished. He stepped forward, his chains rattling like punctuation. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the official statement from the vehicle's owner, Mr. Robert Whitman. A statement, I might add, that was conspicuously absent from the prosecution's filings. The judge frowned. The owner? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Whitman told police the night his car was stolen that he had left it running outside a gas station. Someone jumped in and drove off. And here's the crucial part, he stated clearly that the person he saw was white. Not black. White. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching like fire. Malik held up the transcript, his voice steady. This is from the original police report. The same report the prosecution chose not to mention. The same report the arresting officer omitted in his testimony. And yet the state wants you to believe that I, a young black man who doesn't even match the description of the thief, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The room erupted into chaos. Spectators muttered, jurors leaned forward, even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor's face flushed as he scrambled to respond. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. No, Malik cut in, his voice low but cutting. What's irrelevant is the truth when it doesn't fit the story you want to tell. I was arrested blocks away, walking home with friends, nowhere near the vehicle when it was abandoned. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. The judge leaned back slowly, his hand pressed against his temple. The case that had begun as routine was unraveling with every word the boy spoke. And Malik wasn't done yet. He let the silence settle, then spoke with quiet force. This isn't just about me. It's about a system that decides guilt before facts, that looks at someone like me and thinks close enough. The real suspect got away that night. But I was here, and I was black, and that was enough. The courtroom was silent now, but the silence was heavy, charged, filled with the sound of truth landing where no one had expected it. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, his voice rougher now. Does the prosecution have anything further? Wright hesitated, his composure shattered. No, Your Honor. The judge let out a long breath, adjusting his glasses, and for the first time that day, he looked at Malik not with amusement but with something else. Something closer to recognition. The weight of silence pressed down on the room like a physical force, as though the very walls were waiting to hear what would happen next. The gavel rested in Judge Holloway's hand, but for once he did not raise it. His eyes remained fixed on Malik, studying the boy with an expression that was neither dismissive nor amused. For the first time, the judge looked uncertain. Malik held his gaze, steady and unblinking. He had not shouted, had not raised his voice, had not begged for sympathy. He had simply spoken with clarity, with logic, with the kind of knowledge the courtroom was not used to seeing in someone his age, and certainly not in someone who looked like him. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as if to buy himself a moment. Then, slowly, he spoke. The charges brought against the defendant, Malik Johnson, he paused, his voice carrying across the room with deliberate weight, are dismissed. The words struck like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the room erupted. Half the gallery gasped in disbelief, the other half muttered in relief. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The bailiff shifted, looking confused, as though unsure whether to restore order or simply let the chaos wash over. But Malik did not move. He remained still, his expression calm, almost serene. The dismissal had not surprised him. He had known the case was built on cracks. What mattered now was the way the truth had cut through the arrogance, the way the room had shifted from laughter to silence. That was the victory. Judge Holloway tapped the gavel lightly, the sound thin compared to its earlier strikes. Order. Order in the court. Slowly, the noise died down. The judge leaned forward, his eyes lingering on Malik. For a long moment, he seemed to wrestle with something unsaid. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, stripped of the mockery. The question lingered like smoke, impossible to ignore. Malik knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom he had stood in today would not be the last. One day, he would walk back into a chamber like that, but not as a defendant. He would stand as an attorney, advocating for those whose voices shook when they should have thundered, for those who never had the chance to speak. He would carry the memory of this day, not as a scar but as a fire, a reminder that even a system built to suppress could be forced to listen if someone dared to stand tall. As he walked away from the courthouse, the noise of reporters fading into the distance, Malik felt the weight of possibility pressing against him. He thought of the kids back in his neighborhood, kids who had already been told what they were and what they could never be. He thought of the stories his mother had told him of men and women swallowed by a system that saw them only as numbers on a docket. He thought of the future, not as a distant dream, but as a promise. The parable was clear, though no one spoke it aloud. Justice was not a gift handed down from on high. It was not something to be expected or assumed. It was something to be fought for, demanded, shaped by the courage of those willing to question, to challenge, to refuse silence. And that was the lesson Malik carried with him. That was the lesson the courtroom, the jury, the judge, the spectators, all of them, were forced to confront. That sometimes the smallest voice, the one dismissed as laughable, the one mocked and underestimated, can become the loudest. That knowledge is power, and preparation is resistance, and truth, when spoken with conviction, can shake even the heaviest chains. For years to come, those who sat in that courtroom would remember the day. Some would remember the smirk on the judge's face and the way it vanished. Some would remember the prosecutor's faltering confidence. Some would remember the collective gasp when the truth broke through the lies. And some would remember the boy himself, standing tall, refusing to be crushed. But for Malik, it was not about memory. It was about momentum. About carrying the fight forward. About ensuring that next time, when another boy stood in chains, the system would not be so quick to laugh. The gavel had fallen, the case dismissed. But the echoes remained, not as an ending, but as a beginning. In the story of Malik Johnson, the teenager mocked by a judge who learned too late he was a genius in disguise, became more than a courtroom tale. It became a reminder. A challenge. A call. That justice is fragile, but change is possible. That even in the darkest rooms, a single voice can bring the light.